this video, we are going to look into ASP.NET MVC. Basically, we are going to cover some fundamentals and a very introduction, or say basic beginner's introduction to ASP.NET MVC. So as part of this video, first of all, I am going to introduce you ASP.NET MVC and then MVC lifecycle. So in general, how model, view, controller work together in a very brief and a very understandable manner. And next we are going to develop a very basic ASP.NET MVC application. So that is going to be on how MVC, all of those three components work together, and we are going to see that in the form of an example. And we are going to touch only get operations for now, but not really the post yet. And now we are going to start with ASP.NET MVC. So what exactly is ASP.NET MVC? So first of all, it is just another technology which is mainly used to develop web-based applications. So we already have tons of other ways actually in order to develop any kind of web application. Like we have ASP.NET, PHP, JSP, Node.js with Express, and so on. So you can just consider ASP.NET MVC as just another technology in order to have a web-based application to be developed. And ASP.NET MVC is based on the core fundamentals and the concepts of ASP.NET. If you are familiar with ASP.NET and its basic fundamentals and the basic concept, we should be really having a great idea of how ASP.NET MVC works internally. So the entire ASP.NET MVC framework runs on top of ASP.NET. So as long as you have ASP.NET installed on your machine, which usually comes with Visual Studio and with Windows as well, you should be having ASP.NET MVC to be installed seamlessly, all by just using either NuGet package manager or other package managers you might have. So all you have to do is just install ASP.NET MVC related DLLs using Visual Studio or other package managers, and you are going to have MVC installed automatically. So this is very much important. Again, ASP.NET MVC is not completely different. It is built on existing standards and the existing principles or existing core of ASP.NET. So it is really working on ASP.NET. So if you don't have ASP.NET installed, MVC is not going to work. Even though it is developed on top of ASP.NET, the development methodology is entirely different from that of ASP.NET. So those guys who are familiar with ASP.NET may have an understanding of page lifecycle. For example, I may have page init, page pre-init, page load, all the event handlers, page pre-render, render, and so on. So we have a kind of a life cycle for any kind of request for a particular page, and all of that life cycle is completely gone. So there is no page life cycle with respect to MVC. MVC has got a different life cycle. So all the knowledge whatever you have in ASP.NET with respect to page life cycle, view state, and all of that stuff is completely gone in MVC. So the environment or the development methodology for MVC applications is completely different from that of ASP.NET. And MVC, as I mentioned, it stands for Model View Controller. So ASP.NET MVC, the core development or the core strategy behind the scenes is to implement a standard pattern called MVC pattern. So MVC is basically a pattern, and that particular pattern for ASP.NET has been implemented and the product came out as ASP.NET MVC. So I'm going to cover about MVC pattern a bit later, but for now just consider this is a frequently used pattern by the developers among all kinds of platforms in order to develop various user interfaces. And using MVC, you can have ASP.NET based applications by using ASP.NET MVC framework. So prior to ASP.NET MVC framework, if you would like to implement your own MVC, you have to develop your own MVC framework from the scratch using ASP.NET and then somehow hack around existing page lifecycle. So we don't need to do that anymore, as because Microsoft introduced its own MVC version of ASP.NET which includes this MVC pattern altogether. So the core idea behind ASP.NET MVC is to integrate with all kinds of user interface frameworks or JavaScript frameworks seamlessly. So which means whenever we use ASP.NET MVC, we really have full control for each and every particular tag or HTML element along with the styles, and we can dictate on how the user interface is supposed to behave, and we are in full control of it. Unlike ASP.NET, which actually controls itself by emitting its own HTML, its own view state, its own JavaScript and postbacks and so on. But coming to ASP.NET MVC, nothing of those particular rapid application development features are going to be made available for MVC. In MVC, you are the guy who is going to develop and write the applications from the scratch, including each and every particular tag you would like to check. So nothing is automatic. At the same time, as you are going to develop everything from the scratch, you will be in control of everything and you have the flexibility to integrate with anything. And another goal is ASP.NET MVC to become as open source. So ASP.NET MVC source code itself is available in GitHub and you can download it for debugging or troubleshooting purposes. So ASP.NET MVC is open source, and at the same time it integrates with other open source frameworks or technologies as long as they have the same kind of principles of the open standards and the MVC related stuff. So we have AngularJS, jQuery and Knockout, which they themselves are not MVC, but they are somehow related to MVVM framework. But jQuery is not. jQuery is something related to DOM. So that is Document Object Model and AJAX communications and so on. No MVC or no MVVM is available as part of jQuery, but still it can integrate with MVC. I mean ASP.NET MVC. So ASP.NET MVC can work with any of the front-end frameworks, whether or not they are MVC or MVVM related stuff. So it has got no idea about the front-end frameworks, and any kind of front-end frameworks, it is very easy to integrate with MVC, and ASP.NET MVC itself is open source. So let us jump into MVC. So in that particular MVC, I am going to cover views and controllers first, and later on we are going to look into models. So for now I am not going to touch the models at all. We will be working with views and controllers and have sound understanding between the differences between these two. So let us consider you have a web server, and this web server currently is hosting an ASP.NET MVC application in this fashion. So I have one ASP.NET MVC application hosted inside a web server. So let us consider what exactly is Vue. First of all, Vue sits inside an MVC application, and this particular view is nothing but an user interface. So which means all the user interface elements like the text boxes, checkboxes, grids or whatever will be defined as part of view. So view is essentially what the user is going to see later on. So view stands for user interface with all the user interface elements like text boxes, labels, grids, checkboxes, buttons and so on. And those particular UI elements are going to be supposed to be bound to data. Like if I have a text box like first name, it has to be bound to some kind of property like first name, which could be filled from a database. For example, I have a grid which might be able to display all the addresses of a particular customer, and I would like to fetch all the addresses from the database. So data grid, which is going to be available on the user interface, which is nothing but a view. So the data grid inside the view maybe need to be binding to the data with respect to addresses or something else. So all of that UI or user interface elements gets bound to the data and finally will be presented to the user. Next, this is pretty much important. View is going to be sitting inside MVC application, so which means view will be available at the web server level, and once this particular view has completed its process, it is going to render or spit out HTML, CSS and JavaScript and finally returns that point to the client. In this case, client is nothing but browser. So view is going to be responsible to render all the HTML and send that particular HTML back to the browser. So whenever I say HTML, essentially it includes other components of web page which are nothing but CSS and JavaScript and so on. So this is pretty important. A view which is going to be sitting at the web server level inside an MVC application, once it has completed its process of data binding, all the user interface elements will be rendered and spit out HTML, and that HTML is going to be sent back to the client. Next, we are going to look into the controller. And again, controller is going to be sitting inside an MVC application here, and which along sits with the view. So we have the controller and view sitting inside MVC application. So what is controller? First of all, the controller is the one which receives a request from the browser. So whenever we request anything from the browser, any kind of web page or some kind of information to be requested, that entire request actually goes through the controller. So controller is the first component which gets hit by that respective request. So the first request or any kind of request will be handled only by the controller first, which is going to be sitting inside MVC application. So controller internally contains several actions. So you can just consider each of those actions are nothing but methods in general. So a controller can have multiple actions, and each of those actions can be considered as methods. We can have as many number of actions as possible inside a controller, and whenever any kind of request is sent from the client, that particular request is going to be handled by the controller and will be forwarded to the respective action. So which means finally a request, whenever it is sent from the browser, is going to be handled by an action, and the forwarding of that particular request is going to be done by the controller. So which means our MVC framework is smart enough to figure out which control needs to be picked up, and within the controller which action needs to be picked up. I can have multiple controllers in an MVC application, and I can have multiple views, and each of the controllers can have multiple actions. Based on the request the MVC framework receives, MVC framework will be forwarding that particular request to the respective controller, and that too to the respective action only. So let us see what exactly is action now. So action is responsible to process the request. So once a request has been sent from the browser, as it is going to be received finally by an action, action is responsible to process the request. So whenever I say process the request, imagine you are fetching from the database, filling with some data, or sending any email, or consuming a web service. Any business logic should be part of action. So any kind of information you are going to fetch dynamically from multiple other sources or push to other sources, all that should be happening inside action. And ultimately, once action has completed its process, it is going to pick up a view from a set of views available, and that particular view is going to be finally selected, and that view is going to be responsible to get the information or data from action and finally send the information back to the client. So which means the request comes to the controller, and then the controller throws that request to an action, and the action processes the request, gets the data out of it, picks a particular view, and the view receives the data, and the view binds all the data to the respective user interface components. It renders the view with all the user interface elements. As part of the rendering process, it generates the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and finally that entire JavaScript or HTML or CSS will be sent to browser. So this is pretty much what we can say about views and controllers. So essentially views and the controllers will be sitting at MVC application itself. View gets rendered at server. The result is going to be HTML with all the respective CSS and JavaScript, and finally will be sent to the browser. So let us see more on views. So views can interact with controllers too. So it is not just only one way, it could be the other way around as well. So which means action can pick up a view and send the information to the view. And not only that, a view itself can sometimes invoke any kind of controller or an action. So view can have the flexibility to actually directly call any kind of action or access the controller itself. And this is an example. Imagine I am having a change in the view, so which means the user might have changed or something, or the user might have requested different information or whatever. That can trigger a kind of a request from the browser, and that could again go to the controller and action. And not only that, a view from the server itself can access the controller directly for more information, and then finally, based on the information it must have received from the controller within the server, that particular information will gets bound to the user interface elements and finally will be sent back to the client. So let us have a quick demonstration on developing or creating an ASP.NET MVC application from the scratch. Let us add a controller and an action and a view and test the application. Just wanted to ensure we have not covered the models yet. We have just covered views and the controllers having actions. So let us have the demonstration. So I open Visual Studio, I create a new project, and ensure that you have selected web here, and for now I put in C samples. You can put anything. So in this case I would like to have the project to be named as sample01. Ensure that you have selected ASP.NET Web Application. Click OK. And now let us go with empty. We have other options, but I would like to start with the empty so that we'll know what we are doing. And after selecting empty, make sure that you have selected MVC. So that is pretty important. And for now I am not going to select unit test, but if you would like to have any kind of unit test to be added, you can just add that one too. But for now I am not going to add any unit tests, and just click OK. And now you can see I have a solution with sample01, which is having a project called sample01. So of course in this case both project name and the solution are same, but if you'd like to make it different, you can do that while creating the new project itself. So for now, this particular project has got 3 folders like controllers, models, and views. So essentially you can see MVC, models, views, and controllers. So as we have not covered on models, we will be working with the views and controllers for now, and later we are going to cover models in a bit of time. So let us go with views. We have got nothing here other than web config, and nothing inside controllers, nothing inside views. So now we are going to start creating the controller first, as because from the previous presentation you might have seen like from the client the first request always comes to the controller, and the controller needs to have an action. So let us follow the same. I start to create a controller first, create an action. So I right click on the controllers, go to add and go for the controller here. And now I can just select MVC controller and click add. So you can give your own name here, it could be anything. So in this case I can say home, or you can say sample, whatever you would like to mention, but ensure that the controller name has to be suffixed with controller. So this name has to be there. So let us provide any other name prefix. So the controller name has to be there in order to figure out by the ASP.NET MVC framework itself. So it is important that every particular controller file should have the name suffixed with controller. So in this case I just wanted to go with sample and click add. And now you can see I have sample controller with the same name. And by default it has already added an action for us. This is the action I was talking about. Those are nothing but very simple methods. So you can have the actions which are essentially nothing but the methods, and you can have more and more actions as necessary. So for now, index is the only action available inside the controller called sample. And that particular action, you can see it is actually trying to retrieve a view and send back to the user. So let us switch back to my presentation. The action is supposed to pick up a particular view from the list, get the view out of it, and finally get the view to be rendered back to the browser. So once I switch back to this, you can see I have the sample, which is the controller. Inside that I have an action called index. It could be any name here, but that is the default action it has created. And this particular index action is actually trying to pick up a view and finally return it back. So as part of this returning process, the view processes itself by actually rendering all the user interface elements, gets the data bound, and finally generates the HTML out of it and sends back to the user. But you can see I don't have any kind of view currently available. You can see whenever you have created the controller, which is nothing but the sample, Visual Studio is smart enough to create something like a folder called sample with the same name as the controller. So you have the same name as the controller here, but that is inside the views folder. But I don't have the view. So no view has been created. So now it is going to be our job to create a view so that the same view gets picked up by the respective action called index. So the easiest way to do that is right click on the action and say add view. So the moment I say add view, it is going to ask you the view name. So essentially in this case I would like to have the same name as of the action name. So I go with the same name for now. And it is asking us if I'm having any kind of master page or whatever. So in this case I don't want to provide any of the master pages, so just remove that. And it is asking if the view is supposed to be bound to any kind of model. So even now I am saying I don't want to have that view to be bound to any of the models. It is just going to be a very plain simple view. So just click add. And the moment I click on add, you can see it has actually added index, which is nothing but the view itself. So it is having an extension .cs HTML. So this is completely different from our ASPX or ASPX.cs. So this is entirely different. This is based on the Razor right now. So this is based on Razor engine or Razor markup. So this has got no relation with our traditional ASPX based tools or the controls. So this is entirely different. For now, let us switch back again. So I have the controller, which is named as sample. Inside the controller, I have the action called index. And this particular index action is going to send or pick up a view. As I did not name that view, it is trying to find the same name as of the action name. So in this case, as you did not provide any name here, it is going to try to find the view which is having the same name as of the action inside the same folder as of the controller folder inside the views folder. So every time by default, as again I wanted to say, by default whenever you say return view, it tries to find the view which is having the same name as of the action name inside the same folder as of the controller name, finally made available as part of views. So you can see this index is nothing but named as view, and at the same time this controller name sample is nothing but the one what we are going to see here. So that is how it is going to check. So if that is not available in this location, there are other further locations where it is going to check, and those will be covered eventually. But for now, just consider ourselves like whenever you try to return a view with no name, it tries to find a view with the same name as of the action inside the same folder as of the controller name, and that folder needs to be available as part of views folder at the very root. So as like that we have, let us go to index and let us put some information like hello. So I did not do anything other than just hard coding some information here. And now the easiest way to test this is you can just right click on this and go to view in browser, or you can just say execute. So anything is fine. So the easiest for me right now, I just right click here and go for view in browser, and let us see what's going to happen. And now you can see I got hello. So let us take a quick look at the URL here. First of all, you can see sample, and then I have index. So you know that the name of the controller is nothing but sample. So in our case, if you quickly switch back to our controller, you can see the name of the controller itself is sample, and this is exactly the same name what it is actually being put as part of the URL. And within the controller, I am saying that please go to the action named index. So if you switch back to this, you can see this is the index I am going to refer. So this is pretty important. Whenever ASP.NET MVC evaluates the URL, it certainly looks for the controller name and then the action name and so on. So this concept is called as routing, and I'm going to cover that routing a bit more later, but for now let us consider you are just going with the controller name and the action name for now. So I am trying to fetch or execute the action called index, which is available inside this particular controller, and while executing that particular action, this action is going to be responsible to pick up a view with its own name, and that view is going to be rendered, which finally actually spits out the HTML which contains hello. So in that way I have my first application. But let us consider I would like to add a new action. So I can add something like this. So I can say hi, and in this case I can say return another view. So this is valid too. But again, I don't have a view with the same name as of say hi. So the easiest way, right click here, go to add view and say hi. So that is going to be the default name. And again, I don't want to provide any of these, and just click add. And now you can see there is one more thing called say hi, which is essentially added to the same folder as, because say hi is my particular action which is available inside the same controller called sample. So that is the reason inside the same views and inside the same sample folder I have say hi. So in this case I just would like to say hi. So let me test this. I go to view in browser, and now you can see I'm saying from the controller sample execute action say hi. And now say hi returns the view. So I have the controller, I have the action picks up the view and returns back the view. So you can test the other two. So I can say index, and now you can see index action is still working, it is returning hello. And similarly I can again switch back to my say hi and just say hi. So I get hi out of it. So I can also have a view to be returning other view. For example, imagine as part of the execution of this action, I would like to return a view related to this index. So which means say hi by default, whenever you say view, it tries to fetch with the same name say hi. So this is the one which gets associated automatically. But instead, let us consider I would like to return index as part of say hi. Even that is possible by just writing index here. So what I'm saying here is that whenever I try to execute say hi, it has to return a view with this name index. So it is going to the same folder sample inside the views and searches for the view with this name called index. So let us build this project for a second. And now go to say hi and say view in browser. And now you can say hi. It is supposed to say hi, but instead it has switched to hello, as because even though I asked the action say hi to be executed, it indeed picked a different view called index. So that is how you can actually pick other views, even though those particular views may or may not be related to the same action. Okay, so now that we have some understanding about the controllers, actions and views, we should really jump into models. So let us get back to my presentation. So we have already completed the demo, so let us switch to the next concept called models. So as part of MVC, we already covered the views and the controllers, and now we are going to cover models. So what is model? First of all, a model represents data. So model contains data, model contains information. But again, data, nothing but it is an instance of a class, plain class with plain properties. So I can have a student class with essentially register number, first name, last name, just 3 properties. So that particular class essentially can be instantiated in multiple ways in order to hold the data. So I can create an instance of a student and I can store the information of the student inside that particular instance, and that instance is nothing but the model. So I can have the model which represents the data. The model is nothing but the instance of a class. The model can contain several properties, and each of those properties can hold values or collections of information. Where is it being used in our MVC model or the architecture we discussed earlier? First of all, it can be used anywhere in the life cycle, especially inside the MVC application. So as long as you are inside the MVC application, it could be used anywhere. So which means here or here or here or anywhere. So let us see where all we can use it. First of all, the main motto of the model is to transfer the data, to maintain the state, to hold the information or to hold the data, and to transfer the data across controllers to actions or actions to views or views to back, etc. So as long as you wanted to maintain or transfer data across multiple components inside the MVC application, you are going to use models. So in this case, let us consider I am going to send some kind of information from the action to the view. You can generate a model, you can instantiate a model and send that model straight to the view. So in this case, I can say from the controller to the view, you can send a model. Of course, via action. Controller itself will not do anything, but controller essentially has actions inside, and the actions are going to be responsible to process the request, fetch the data from the database, push the data into the model, and finally send that model to the view. And view is going to honor that model and bind all those user interface elements to the respective model, generates the HTML and sends back to the browser. So in this case, you are transferring the data from action to view using model. from action to another method or another process. Imagine from the action I would like to call some other method which is not related to action or view. It could be something else in general. So I can have a method, some external method or some external process. That particular process or the method may wanted to receive some kind of data from the action, and that could also be a model. And in return from the external method or from the external process, I can get that particular data back to the action in the form of model again. So which means the data can flow out of the action and can also be received by the action. So you can see the model is not just only for the view or not just only for the controller or action. It could be everywhere. As long as you have some data to be transferred, it could be a model, and that particular model could be used to transmit the data regardless of whether it is view or controller or action or method or whatever. And there is one more scenario. Imagine I am sending some information from the client to the controller. Whenever I say action, it is nothing but the controller. So imagine the browser has sent some information, and that whole information will be turned to a model, and that particular model will be finally forwarded to an action. Action receives the client information in the form of model, processes the data, creates a new model out of it, sends to the view, and view again renders everything back to the client in the form of HTML. And you can see model is almost everywhere, but model is sitting inside the MVC application borders. That is very important. And now let us add one more demo. So which means I would like to have a model to be added to our existing solution, and I would like to use the same model to be transferred or to be having some kind of data which needs to be transmitted from action to the view. So which means action is going to be responsible to create or instantiate the model and send that model to the view, and view is supposed to be honoring that model, fetch the information from the model, and finally display that information right inside the view, generate the HTML and send it across. So that is what I am going to see now. So we will leave this alone. So let me close this all together. So let me create a new controller completely. So I'm going to call this one as something like first controller. You can just put any name there, but ensure that you always have controller as a suffix. So I have the first controller, and by default I have an action here, and I just wanted to leave the basic action like that, but with a view. So let us add a view for this action. So I call the view name as index, and I click add, and you can see under views I have the same name as of the controller name first with a new folder there. New folder has been created, and inside that I have index. So I'm going to say switch to first message for model demo. So this is just plain text, nothing special about this. So I just built the solution for now. There is no model involved yet, just wanted to ensure that this is working. So I fetch the model here, I fetch the view here, and you can see it is currently going to the first controller, and inside that I have the index action, which essentially goes to this one. So my goal is, instead of using first index, I would like to say first message. So I would like to say first message. So the moment I say in that way, it is actually supposed to execute an action called message, and that particular action is supposed to instantiate a model, and that particular model is going to be sent to the view, and view is going to be fetching the information from that model and send it across to the client. So let us create a model. So in this case I would like to create a model. So I just say add class. So ensure that I'm actually creating inside the model folder, and the class name is going to be something like sample model. You can put whatever the name you want it. So just click add, and you can see it's just a plain class, and inside that I would like to say or add a property called message, or for that purpose MSG to be short. So just don't want things to be confused between the actions and the models here. So I have a model class called sample model, and of course it is not essential to have model in your class, but it is just a better understanding or better readable if you have model there. So it is not compulsory to have model as part of your class name or file name. So it is just for our demonstration. So I have a class named sample model, and inside that I have a property called message, which is of type string. So that's exactly the model. So now inside the first controller I am going to add a new action called message. So inside this particular message, so which is nothing but an action which could be fetched using first/message in the browser. So inside this action I would like to create an instance of sample model. So this is currently under a different namespace, that is sample01.models. So let us include that. So you can see sample.models. So as because if you open your sample model, you can see it is under this namespace. So you need to have this namespace to be imported here at the top in order to use that particular class. So I have the sample model, I instantiated it. So this particular object O internally will have a property called message, and I can say something like hello sir. So this is the message I would like to have. And that particular model currently is nothing but O. So O is the model instance which is internally having all the required data which needs to be sent to the view. So all I am going to say is return view, and I am going to send the model. So I am saying that I am actually returning a view. At the same time I am sending the model instance which is nothing but O, but I don't have a view yet. So let me create a view by right clicking that and say add view, and view name is going to be message. It could be anything, but for now, as I mentioned, let us actually go with the same view name as of the action name, and it is going to ask you for the model if we have any. So in this case I can just say something like you can get the model from sample1.models.sample model. So this is one way, but let us consider I don't want to provide anything here, but you can also provide it later. So select that. So I will say empty without model for now. So just click add, and now you can see I have the model, I have the view here, but I need to fetch the information which is being sent from the action. So if you switch back to our controller, our action is sending an instance called O, and O is of type sample model. So I need to fetch this particular O directly inside our view. So in order to fetch that, first of all, you need to say to the view that this particular view is going to receive an instance of type sample model. So that is essential. So in order to say that, you need to include model attribute. So you can say I am going to use a model available like this. So all I am saying here is that the view message, so message is the view here, this view is going to receive an instance of this particular class which is nothing but the model, and that particular instance can always be retrieved just by using model. So this is very important. So the moment you type in model, you can see it could automatically recognize it is of type sample model inside the model's namespace of sample01. That is essential. So model is a reserved word here, which essentially maps to the instance of the model which has been received by the view. So if you switch back to the controller, this instance O is going to be automatically made available in the form of model. So this model essentially contains O, and O is nothing but model, and you can see this model is of this type, which is essentially the same type as of O. So O here is actually sample model type, and you are saying that the view is going to receive an instance of type sample model, which is essentially the same, and that instance can be automatically referred using the built-in ASP.NET MVC keyword called model. And the model, the moment I say model, you can see I have message right away. So all I am saying is that that particular model, once it has been thrown to the view, can be accessed using model attribute, or say model keyword, and this is essentially nothing but the instance of this particular model, and I can access all the properties out of it. So I just save this. Let us build this. And I right click here and view in the browser. And now you can see it has actually fetched hello sir. And let us quickly see the view source of it, this one. And if you see here, it has actually thrown hello sir. So inside the div, it did not push model.message. Instead, it fetched the value available inside the message, which is available as part of the model object, and directly placed that message right at the same place as here. And that is how I got hello sir. So if you are using any kind of text box or something, you can still use that. So for example, I have hello message here, so just leave it like that. Now I can say input type equal to text, and I can say value equal to, I can still say model.message. So even this is valid. Essentially what I'm saying is that I would like to have a text box, and that text box should have a value which is nothing but the value available inside this property of that model object thrown by the action method. So let us again right click and go to the view browser. And now you can see I have a text box which essentially has the same value as of whatever we have seen inside our model object. So in that way we can understand, like, I have the controllers, I have the actions, I have the model, and the model is going to be sent to the view, and the view is going to fetch the information from this model and have that information to be directly put into the user interface elements, and that will be finally sent back to the client.